Can you guys hear me now? Testing. Okay, great. I will repeat my preamble. Welcome to the October 10th Dev Call. We're back on the regular schedule, so we offset by a week because of Dev Day. Now we're back, so this will be happening every 2 weeks. We have a pretty packed agenda today, so we'll go through the items at a high level really quickly. First, Dan's going to talk about growth, particularly channels and frames, which are the two big drivers for growth on the app and protocol level. Next update is going to be around direct casts and some of the things we're thinking about there to drive more developer adoption. And then finally, we'll talk through sign-up costs, what we're doing there to reduce spam and keep lowering costs. Hubs, where we're doing a lot of improvements on the hub architecture. And then finally, some FIPs and sign-in with Farcaster, which we've been thinking about. Dan, do you want to kick us off with channels?
Yes. So as everyone knows, we shipped channels last Friday. I think overall positive change. Not everyone is happy, but I think most people seem happy. And we are trying to iterate on the areas where people are still frustrated. So I put 4 links here, but just in terms of like what we've actually shipped, we made sure that old casts that are not in channels are back on profiles. We've improved the way replies work. We've added easier ways to invite people to channels. And then I think we are kind of considering a couple of things. One, kind of if channels feel like they're in a stable enough place, I think rotating to focus on onboard directly to a channel as you invite someone to Farcaster, which I think we kind of previewed. There is a version of the world where we actually go and formalize how to do channel requests. I think obviously this is a pain point for users, and certain channel owners still haven't quite figured out which tools to use. I think there's a version where we can kind of like push tools from the ecosystem like Cura from OpenRank, or if you're, gating with Moxie or Hypersub. But I think making sure that we think through like what is the default experience for someone versus having to push them to a third-party tool. Like we know from the previous kind of iteration of channels when it was just AutoMod basically, that most users don't necessarily want that, and it's much better for them to start with something simple and then kind of expand once they kind of want additional functionality. So I don't think we've made a decision here, and if we do, we're going to kind of circulate a proposal. And the important thing here is it would use APIs similar to what we did with invites, where there's kind of a simple experience for someone just getting started. You invite just like you're inviting to a group chat, but anyone more sophisticated is actually using kind of like channel software or bots to actually do and manage most of their invites. And so I would imagine the same thing would apply to requests, and it would kind of tightly integrate with the kind of like call to action button that exists on channel profiles. So just to make sure I reiterate, no decisions here. It's just something that we're thinking about in terms of that's the like last big remaining piece of feedback outside of, hey, I'm a new user, how do I get into channels? Which obviously there's a request component of it, but there's also, if we go focus on invite to channel and onboard directly into a channel, I think that might be the way to actually solve. Any questions on channels? Okay, what are we telling creators in Buenos Aires who previously used channels for distribution? So previously channels were hashtags topics. That model did not work. So we took an attempt of changing the model and making them more community oriented. And there is more work to get into a channel, but our view is that creates stronger communities and just like higher quality experience for everyone. I did do a cast today, just soliciting input from people who are happy with the changes, and you can actually go see that like list of people and all the reasons they're excited about this. But I do think there's a large chunk of people on the network that are excited about the changes as it relates to like building stronger communities. It didn't work, our opinion. We've been building this network for 4 years, and generally Varun and I like kind of have a point of view on is this working or not. And I think channels, they kind of always were close, but you didn't have a massive number of just like really great channels. You had a few instances, and it actually required a lot of work from the owner or mod. And I still think it's going to require work from owners and mods, but I think that this new model actually, once you kind of get the right group of people in a channel, it's much easier to build a community with them.
Yeah, the only other thing I'll add is if you don't have access to a channel, just try reaching out to the channel host and pinging them and seeing if they'll accept you as a member to their channel. Try reading what the channel's perspective is and what kind of members they're looking for. And look, ultimately, if you don't like the way a channel is selecting its members, you can always start your own and focus on a different group of people and maybe take the channel in a different direction.
How many weeks? I'm not sure. I think we are putting together some dashboards internally in terms of just like measuring the success. But I think one high level way to think about it is just like what percentage of users are kind of in channels, engaging with channels. And if that number basically is high enough, and I think we need to kind of define that internally first, then I would say it's probably working. And if it's not, then it is either too difficult to join channels or there are not enough tools for channel owners to invite people. Okay. Are hosts visible? Yes, if you click on the members tab, you can actually see the owner plus the mods. So that's on any channel, you just click members. We can make that maybe clearer on the profile. Is it a pain point to DC when they get so many tools? Well, there are other tools that people can use. And I think this goes back to my point about requests is maybe there's a version where actually invite someone to Farcaster and onboard directly to channel is actually the more important thing to focus on first. But there is this kind of unresolved request probably should be a formal component of channels in the same way that invites are. I think we didn't want to put that up front because there's another issue of I actually think having channels grow too quickly. We've had a couple of people basically like, okay, I don't believe in the membership model. I'm going to put my link publicly. And then they immediately had to remove it because they found out that there's actually a lot of spam on the protocol. And so I think that going a little slower in terms of how people grow their channels and then kind of like building in the tools. And now we have a set of developer tools that exists and kind of like actually positioning that to channel owners to say, here's how you can go build your channel. Here are some best practices. Like, if you want to kind of do it in this way, this is how we'd suggest you go do it. I think the next key thing to fix, how to join a channel without bothering the host. Yes. So I think this goes to the idea of like requests. And so I think what we're weighing off is, should you have this ability to invite someone into Farcaster to directly join a channel or focus on requests? Quite hard to moderate not related content on channels. It depends on the channel. So I'd want to know specifically. I think the whole point of the membership model is to, if someone's being spammy, remove them from the channel.
I think that's what Elgin's saying is that it was hard previously and it's
Oh,
better.
sorry, I'm misreading that. Okay. Notifications when invited to be a member of a channel are a little hard to find. There's a dedicated channels tab. So I'm curious what people are having a hard time on that because they will bundle up together. So if you have 15 notifications, they just bump up to the top of the feed. And if it's just getting buried there, maybe we add some type of request permanent tab on the channels tab. Yeah, so the notifications on announcements, this is a point we considered originally eliminating it, but we decided that people are adults. They should be able to use the announcement functionality the way they want. And my recommendation would be either reach out to the host or just unfollow that channel. Like if someone's being really spammy, just don't engage with that community. And so if that continues to be a problem, call it a week later, once people have actually kind of figured out maybe to not over notify, then we'll probably try to think through some limits. But I actually think it's much more powerful to allow, adults to be able to say, hey, I actually understand that this power exists. I mean, this basically exists in Telegram groups where you can kind of like, spam the whole group and stuff like that. Okay. Frog middleware, so folks can. So Christopher, I think this is Zach Terrell basically has built a open source channel kit on top of Frog. So yeah, I think that
Yeah,
would be something to talk to him about.
I'm working with Zach and Alex on Channel Kit, but I think actually it's probably better if it's if a lot of this is set inside of Frog as middleware. There's just 1,000 different options, and it's causing people to like not know where to go to make an invite frame.
Okay, I think it's worth it. And maybe Zach is good, but I think the other thing is like there are probably some other infra providers in the ecosystem. Like I know Nanar has a no-code frame studio that they have, and so I wonder if there's a version where if you're already using Nanar to do a lot of the Farcaster data for Channel Kit and then Channel Kit and Frog, it's like maybe there's a collaborative effort there that can actually make it a great baseline. And then obviously you have other developer tools that exist like OpenRanks, Cura, and Moxie and things like that. All right, I want to keep moving because we have a lot of stuff to cover today.
Yeah. I think there's one question, Dan, that's worth talking about, which is what's the criteria for channels working and getting into the protocol? The way I think Dan and I have been thinking about it is we want to run the second leg of the experiment, which is channel onboarding. And I think channels will be successful if we are successfully seeing people create new communities, invite people, and having them join, and that be an actual driver of growth for the protocol. And so if that happens, then it's like a good click up of like, okay, this is actually a mechanism that brings people onto the protocol, and then it's something we can go focus on decentralizing. And the decentralizing part will be the channel creation and the channel moderation, because obviously all channel content is already available.
Yeah. Cool. And then frames, honestly, we've just been really focused on channels last week. Horsefax also was on vacation, well deserved. And then I think we've been working on a couple of like bugs related to allowing people to onboard if they've signed up on another client into Warpcast. That's like been on our list for a really long time, and it's been really frustrating for a set of users. But as we're kind of coming out of this big push on channels, we're starting to kind of think about like a very clear, like, here's what's next step for frames. I think bubbling to the top of that list is very much like within mini apps, adding transaction support, which I think, you know, is going to require a decent amount of work, but making that work pretty well. I will note that for the people who have been asking for mini apps, we have not seen a huge number of additional mini apps be built. So I think it, again, goes back to this thing of getting people to actually build mini apps without always saying, oh, well, if you have this one feature, I'll build the mini app. Like, remember, the original frames launch, there were no transaction support, and people still figured out really creative ways to make it work. And so when the market is pulling something out of us, that is the biggest indication to go to resource it. We are going to continue, I think, to invest here because it came out of like the priority stack from the developers. But I would cite that we do not have a ton of people actively building mini apps right now, outside of Matthew Fox. And I know the Moxie folks like have a big plan for how they'd like to convert. Are mini apps permissionless yet? So I think that again is not a like major change. Like you can go do that, and then there's potentially some security implications, and we can go put the work in there. But I think like not having people actually build them is the bigger issue. And I think and again, I'm a little skeptical on education. I think it like there's a decent number of people in the community. And so it's like, I'd like to see like 3 or 4 or 5 more within just the Farcaster community now, because that's actually how we can actually bring people in. So that's my point. We're still working on it, but I would just keep flagging that like demand driven development is a really good thing. Okay. DCs. I'm going to put this chat here. If you're not in this DC chat and you care about DCs, make sure you're in this chat. Gabriel's been driving this. We shipped auto expiring messages, which I actually think is a core thing that we had to kind of do before December. And this actually will help make everything much more scalable on our side, and also offer a path for, you know, interoperability and decentralization at some point next year. I think the next thing we're starting to work on, again, coming out of frames, is we are not frames, channels getting kind of pushed a little bit off the stack in terms of like all encompassing, is a set of developer APIs. And so I think we'll probably share a kind of like working doc in the next day or two in the developer chat channel for feedback as to, is this a set of APIs that would people be most focused on? And so I think it's probably something around just like interacting with groups and the ability to kind of like have bots help manage groups, which I think works pretty nicely with channels. But I think we kind of want to finalize our point of view internally and then be able to present something that people can react to. That's it on the DC side, Varun.
Cool. Let me go to reducing signup costs. So protocol signups a few weeks ago, we dropped to $2. For those of you who've been around for a year, protocol signups started at $12, and we progressively reduced them. And the thinking has been we want to keep spam on the network under control, both for users and for developers who have to build applications. As we've gotten better and better at dealing with spam, we've continued to crank the fees lower and lower. And the goal is to get to $1 signups, which we're hopeful we'll get to by the end of the year. We also made a change to Warpcast so that when you go through the Warpcast signup flow, your in-app purchase price is only $3 now. The extra $1 goes mostly to Apple and Google for their App Store fees, and then the rest of it is used to do the on-chain transaction and pay the storage fees. So if you invited somebody and they go through the flow today onwards, they're going to see the new lower signup costs. Talking about spam, which is the thing that we've been focusing on to get down to the $1 price point. We've actually rolled out a new spam model over the last week, which is much better at figuring out spam versus non-spam. So previously there was a whole chunk of users where the model would just go, I don't have enough data to know what to do. And so we kind of leave these users in a don't know if they're spammy or not spammy bucket. We're now much better at segregating them into spammy versus not spammy. So the nice side effect of that is a bunch of features that we do, like boosting users, offering USDC rewards, we can now apply it to a larger group of users. So all of these things that you see going out from next week onwards, there's more people that are eligible, more content that's eligible, and more new users joining will now be able to like get these features. So we're really excited about that change. We're also prototyping some like very interesting graph-based detection. So Not a Wizard, who's on Farcaster, has actually been doing a little bit of work with us over the last week, and is working on these two research papers, Fraudar and Oddball, which you can play around with. But the general idea is to use graph relationship between users, which, by the way, is all publicly available data, to find people that are in follow rings or things like that that are typical like spammer behaviors. And so we'll share the results of this if we find that these end up being useful. It's actually something that could potentially be plugged into OpenRank or other apps, or other people can actually use them to enhance their own spam models. So making a lot of progress here, and we're excited about getting the network like much easier to navigate and use, and making it easier for devs to build tools on this. Okay, let me see if there's any questions before we move on. Okay, some wizard jokes. All right, next up is hubs. So one thing that's taken up a lot of the team's time since last week has been, we found a bug that caused hubs to restart very often. It actually started happening recently, and it started affecting our hubs and Naynar's hubs and presumably more hubs out there. And team's been heads down debugging this. It's been a very gnarly issue, and we think it might actually be a bug in the V8 engine that's causing like a memory leak under certain conditions. The good news is that we found the upstream code that's causing this, and we patched around it, so we think this doesn't happen anymore. The less good news is there's no actual way to fix the underlying issue. And so this is a broader symptom of stuff in JavaScript is not always super great with memory. And as we get more and more performance intensive, we might have to move a larger portion of our code base over to Rust to avoid having this happen to us in the future. But we think hubs are reasonably stable right now. And so we're going to put this to the side and go back to feature work, which we've had the two projects, which is SnapChain and the location FIPs. We basically have to put those two mostly on pause for the last week while we've been fixing this. Okay, cool. Second thing, we did make a little bit of progress on SnapChain. So Sanjay, so Aditi was working on the V8 bug fix. Sanjay's been working on some of the SnapChain consensus. We've been using Informal Systems' new Rust library called Malachite, which is like a Tendermint consensus thing. The core of SnapChain's new architecture is we're going to use like a consensus mechanism to group the stuff together and package them into blocks. And we wanted to run ahead and prototype that little piece and make sure that it works in Rust before coming back and saying, hey, this is the design we want to do. So we've got like a rough design that we think makes sense. We're going to build a quick prototype to see if all the pieces actually fit together and this is doable. And then we'll come back and refine out the design a little bit more. And then we'll make a call, yes or no, on like, is this the design we want to double down on? So the good news is we found like a nice implementation for consensus in Rust. It's still new, still got some rough edges, but we are actually pretty excited about it. And so I think we're in a place where we can come back and do another iteration of the design and move forward with this SnapChain. And so the next output from us, hopefully by the next dev call, will be a much longer spec that covers the whole architecture of SnapChain and how we're thinking about it. And then I think we'll go and really poke holes at the design and see if we like it before finalizing it. Cool. Any questions on this before I move on to locations? Okay, location. So the bad news on location is at least the Warpcast team hasn't had much time to make progress on any of this stuff since last week. So we've basically been in a holding pattern because of the bug. But now that we've got that in a good place, we're going to go spend some time looking at this and start implementing it. Christopher or anyone else who's been particularly involved, if you guys have like any last minute comments or changes, now is a good time before we get into like actually building this thing up. Cool. We'll keep everyone posted. We'll probably do like a final update of the spec and then start implementing it and then start pushing the data out from Warpcast side. We also have to, for at least the location on cast, we probably have to do some warpcast level work to support rendering that, which we haven't scoped yet. So we need to go and do that, and we'll let you know when it's done. But the protocol changes might precede the warpcast changes. Cool. The last one coming soon. So one of the features we're going to be shipping hopefully today that Goku's been working on is the ability to connect a Twitter account to your Farcaster profile. And so the idea is that on your profile, you'll be able to say, hey, this is my Twitter account, and have a little badge. People who visit you can click through and see your Twitter profile. The thing that we're excited about with this experiment is to see if it's actually a really good signal to help new users get recognized by the algo. Like, especially if you have a Twitter account that's over like 5 years old, has a bunch of followers, and you come into Farcaster, we can give you like a little boost and say, okay, you're probably a legitimate user. Let's connect you with other folks. So it could be a really good signal for identifying great users and also identifying spammy users. And it's also a nice convenience of like when someone visits your profile, it's an extra trusted signal. And the goal is to eventually get this into the protocol. So this is actually something that you can see at the protocol level, like, DWR is connected at DWR and X to their profile. So the way we're rolling this out is stage one will just be, will allow you to connect it at Warpcast. We want to see how many people are able to connect it successfully, whether the APIs work. Frankly, there's been a lot of issues with X APIs in the past, and I wouldn't be surprised if we run into some issues at scale as they've changed how things work. And so we want to make sure that this whole thing works at the product level at scale. And then if it's actually a useful signal, we'll go and figure out a way to put it in the protocol and actually add these sort of like secondary account verifications. And you can imagine that like over time, things like GitHub and other accounts might also make sense to incorporate into this. But we think that X or Twitter accounts are going to be the most valuable signal for user quality, and will also be useful for users themselves to have on their profile. Cool. We don't have an FIP yet, but hopefully in 2 weeks, once we launch the feature and got some signal on whether it's working or not, we will have some updates there. Any questions on this? Looking at chat. Okay. Last up is sign in with Farcaster. So last time we chatted, we spoke about how the two top priorities were web and multi-client support. And as we got deeper and deeper into thinking about this, one of the things we realized was that the wallet experience that users have is going to make a big impact on how this works, because all of these features depend on signatures from the core custody wallet. And so one of the things we've been exploring with the Coinbase team, with other folks building stuff, is whether smart wallets and passkeys can help. Because you can imagine there being a world where if every Farcaster user had a smart wallet controlled by a passkey, the requesting sign-in with Farcaster might be a much simpler experience, where irrespective of whether you started with Supercast or Farcaster or HeroCast, you make the request to a single domain. So every app can just pop open a browser and say, hey, let's open up, keys.farcaster.xyz and ask the user to sign this message. And so no matter what client you're on, all this experience is locked out. So as we thought about this, we realized, okay, the wallet strategy really informs how this works. And a second thing that people have been asking about is, how do we make it so that Farcaster wallets are set up in such a way that they're portable across clients? And so we want to take a step back and figure this out. So we're doing a bunch of research on this now. This is still very early, and this will likely take some time to get figured out. And so I put out a cast yesterday, getting some feedback from folks, and we'll be working on this and hopefully have some updates in a couple of weeks on this. Cool. That brings us to the end of the chat. If anyone has any last questions, feel free to post them and we'll talk through them. If not, we will wrap here. So let's see. Curious if there's any thoughts on using a tool like Icebreaker, which has those sort of social verifications. The long-term thinking is we want to have like an open standard where the generic way to think about this is like, okay, there's a verification and an attestation. So you could say that Warpcast attests that user A has an X account or a Twitter account, or Icebreaker attests that user B has a GitHub account or whatever. And an account can have multiple of these verifications, and you can use them for what you like, and you can trust whichever apps you want to verify these different things. So that's the end state of where we want to get to. The first step, I think, is just to make sure, does the Twitter account verification work at scale? Is it actually a useful signal for people on the protocol, for users and developers? And if so, we'll start moving this to the protocol. Okay. All right, I think that's all we have. if there's no other questions, we will wrap here and see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks everyone for joining.